So we want to do more or less the same thing that we usually do and define a function within this event handler, but this time we want to make a simple change, and we want to supply a parameter in here that we can use to access where the mouse position is at, because obviously the mouse position is extremely important in this circumstance with regards to where we're going to place this div. We want it to follow the mouse, therefore using E we can grab the client X and Y position, which essentially is the mouse position. So let's go ahead and just bring this down, and I'm going to go ahead and just create a test so we know that everything's working. I'm going to go ahead and just create a div on the page, and this is going to be called just pause, for example. This is just sort of for debugging and testing purposes. It doesn't really have any other use. Now we want to go ahead and inside of our function here define the top and the left of the mouse position. So I'm going to create a variable called top, and I'm going to create a variable called left, and these are going to be equal to E dot, and then we're going to access the sort of like a method inside of this object. And the first one is client Y. This is essentially the Y position, which is obviously the vertical position. So we want to know how far from the top the mouse is, which is this value here. And then with regards to the left, we want to get the X position, because we want to know how far it is on the horizontal or X axis. So now what we can do is we can feed into this div that I've created called pos, and we can apply these values to this. So we'll get a sort of dynamically updating value. So I'm going to say top plus, and then just a space, and then left. So now what's going to happen is when we move our mouse, we're going to grab the top and the left constantly. So every time the mouse is moved up or down or left or right or vertically, we're going to grab these two values and then just apply them to this pos div. So now what you should see is these values change. You can see underneath my cursor here and underneath the link, you see them changing. So now that we have these values here, we can determine where to place this div that we've created or defined in here, and that we've actually applied to the document by putting it after the link. So now that we've just seen that in action, we can go ahead and get rid of that div and get rid of this line as well. The only problem here is that we want to space this a bit further away from the mouse cursor. We don't want it to be too close to the cursor, because obviously it's going to get in the way and it's going to cause some problems. So I'm going to add 10 to each of these values, and that will just space it sort of 10 pixels below where the cursor is and 10 pixels across from where the cursor is. Okay, so now what we want to go ahead and do is what we want to do is we want to go ahead and apply the position that we've gained here, plus 10. So we want to move this div accordingly. So you've seen that we could update the values inside that div I created just under here, but now we want to do is actually apply the position of this here accordingly. Now this would be the same as applying, say, top as 10 pixels and left as, say, 10 pixels. It could be absolutely anything, the values could be anything, but we can use jQuery to automatically update CSS. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and reference the hover text div, which is hover text. Remember, the ID of this is hover text, so we use a hash to reference the name. And then we want to say .css, and in here we can set top to a particular value here, and then we can do CSS again to set the left to a particular value here. And obviously this value here and this value here we have already gained dynamically depending on where the mouse is, so we can just substitute these in. So I can write top here and I can go ahead and write left here. And now that we've done that, we have another slight problem, and that is that we haven't actually shown this div yet. So what we want to do is we want to just put show on the end of it, and that will change the display none to actually display it. So let's take a look at the code. You can see now at the moment we have another problem. I mean, the one thing is that this div is now following our cursor, but we obviously haven't applied any text to it yet, so it's pretty much useless. So what we want to go ahead and do is just before we show it is apply some text. and that text in here could be absolutely anything, but we're substituting in a variable, and that variable is title. Remember the variable that we gained from our link earlier. So now when we refresh, we can see that we have the div hovering over. You'll probably notice that the tooltip is actually getting in the way of this, but there's a way that we can deal with that, and we'll go through that in a moment. Now the first problem that we're going to solve is when we move away from the link, the div actually remains, so it's really quite annoying and useless. I mean, you wouldn't want to put that on your site. So what we do is after we've used this mouse move event handler, we want to come down here and say dot mouse out and create a new function. So function in here is going to be, let's just pull that down. The function in here is going to be when the mouse comes away from the particular element, and in this case all we really want to do is just go ahead and hide the hover text div, so when the mouse comes away from it, it's hidden and it doesn't remain on the page. So hide like that. So we've shown it here when the mouse goes in and it's being moved around, but when the mouse comes out we want to hide this. So it's quite simple really if you think about it. So now when we come away, you see it just hides, so we can sort of flicker over it and it will show itself and hide itself. So mouse move, it's being shown, and mouse away, it's being hidden. Okay, now the last problem that we sort of have to deal with is the fact that we get this HTML default tooltip appear. Now I took the time to personally research this and how we might be able to disable this tooltip coming up, which default comes up when you supply a title.